Thanks for joining us on LNK TV. I'm Dale Johnson, your host. And here we are today to talk about Lincoln Fire and Rescue with Fire Chief Michael Despain and Nancy Christ, Public Information Officer, the experts on the show. This is going to test your two things, mathematics and your ability for recall, because we're talking about a 56-hour week that is the common structure among firefighters and paramedics in Lincoln Fire and Rescue. So if I could, let's make this as relatable as possible to our listeners and our viewers. Most people work 8-hour shifts. Why don't firefighter paramedics work 8-hour shifts?
Well, the simple answer is we probably could, but it would cost too much money, and we could just stop the show right there and we would be fine. But sometimes it helps to have a little bit of math 101 in terms of how this works, so people understand our crazy schedule and why we get, we work a lot of hours but then get a lot of days off, and so they understand. So the reality is in the private sector, they do work 8 hours. They'll work maybe 10 hours or 12 hours, but they're really working a 40-hour work week, and that's really what it comes down to, is anything over 40 hours would create an overtime cost for most agencies. However, the labor code does specify firefighters in particular can be worked up to 56, really it's 53, but we round it to 56. A 56-hour work week before you start paying overtime. So that's where most fire agencies rely and fall into that category. That's just because it's an exemption within the labor code, and it's just because most agencies understand if you did work less hours, it would create, you need more firefighters to do it. It would cost more money. So we kind of use this, we create this little graphic to kind of illustrate. So most people work a 40-hour work week. You can see firefighters work a 56, and we get the 56 with a very simple math. There's 168 hours in a week. You divide it by 3. That's where you come up with the 56. And so we work 3 shifts. We have an A shift, a B shift, and C shift, and that's where we come up with this math. There are agencies that work 4 platoon or 4 shift, and they have more firefighters and they work less hours, but the majority of the United States works this schedule and what we would call the 56-hour work week. We also look at it, another way to look at it is if everybody worked 8 hours per day, a typical 40-hour work week, and this just illustrates what's typical, where Monday through Friday you might work 8 hours and you get Saturday and Sunday off. Well, if firefighters, and we only had 3 platoons to do that, if they did that, they would have to work every single day all week long. They would never get a day off. And so that's not practical. We've got to give them a day off once in a while. And so we just stack those hours up into a way that looks more like a 24-hour shift. But this is what would happen if we put all the shifts and made them all work 8 hours and gave them their Saturday and Sunday off. Well, we'd have to hire another shift. We'd have to hire more firefighters to cover that gap. So you can see, instead of 3 shifts, we'd end up going to 4 or 5 shifts to cover that risk. And so it's just, it costs more. And so we save money by the fact that firefighters work in a job where they have to work 56 hours a week before we have to pay them overtime versus 40. So thank goodness they're willing to do that.
It's that 24-hour shift. That's a factor too, Nancy, and that was your life.
Yep.
Before becoming a PIO.
That's right.
So take us into that world. How do you adjust, and what is the structure of a week? I'm asking so many questions here at the same time. Is a week Sunday through Saturday for a firefighter?
So we kind of think of our schedule in pods of a 21-day cycle.
Right.
Our work week always starts on a Wednesday, and then we go through every day of the week in a 24-hour period. So we work Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday. So that's a 2-week period. It covers each of the days of the week, each shift 24 hours. So you have that in-between day off. However, keep in mind that we're 24/7. Those doors never close. So if we're out on calls throughout a 24-hour time frame, that in-between day doesn't necessarily equate to a day off. It's a rejuvenation day. It's a day that we rejuvenate, we catch up on sleep, get back to some norm. Of course, we have kids at home. So, people are taking kids to appointments and activities and so forth. So that in-between day sometimes doesn't necessarily equate to a day off. So that's why that 8 days is built into our schedule, because that allows folks the opportunity to get re-engaged into that family network and rejuvenate and get ready to restart that shift work again.
Sometimes you have to give up sleep in order to be a family participant.
Sure.
Don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
See the kids off to school, maybe there's a program at night, maybe
Sure.
there's something during the day that you want to participate in, a birthday. And so you've given up sleep and rest and recuperation in order to become part of your family unit again.
Sometimes, keep in mind that when you get into that rhythm, that becomes your norm. So once you're into that cycle, that you know how to rejuvenate. You know what you need to be ready to go the next day, and that's what our folks do.
Chief, why 56? Is that a contractually negotiated number?
Yeah, so we negotiate with the firefighters on wages, hours, and working conditions. And again, that's kind of the industry standard. There's very few agencies that don't work that schedule when you look at, take the number of agencies and kind of divide it out. Now, there are some agencies that work less hours, but they also work, say, a 10-hour shift and a 14-hour shift, and they're kind of coming and going. You see New York, Chicago, some of the bigger agencies working some of those schedules. But, in the wildland fire, some of those agencies, let's say the Forest Service, they actually work 16 hours, and they may not get paid after a certain amount of time, but they have to stay at the station. So if they get called, they get paid, but if not, then they don't. And so, but they're seasonal too, and so there's a lot of different approaches to how that works across the United States. But for municipal fire departments, because of the assets at risk, we have a 24-hour operation. We can't do seasonal, and we can't do, less activity at night, because that's not always how the calls come in. They don't always discriminate day and night. They come in at all hours of day and night. So that's how we come up with 56. And the reality is our 56-hour work week is common amongst all the agencies we compare with, and it seems to be working with the agency, with the firefighters now. However, what the nuance that is specific to, say, some agencies is how they stack those days when they work. So most agencies could work a 24-hour shift on and then 2 days off, and just rotate that 1 on 2 off forever, and that would meet the FLSA requirements. LFR does it a little different, where they'll stack a few of those days up, and they'll try and work 1 on and 1 off instead of 2 off, and then they stack them up so they get a period of days off. Now they'll call them Kelly days. That's not the legal term, but that's the local term that they use to describe that stretch off. So when they talk about firefighters getting all these days off, well, really all they're doing is they're banking hours that would be more kind of sparse, and they're kind of stacking them up so they can have a little bit more of, let's say, a week where they can actually, if they need to leave town or they want to do something with their family that's, extended family or whatever, they have the opportunity to do that.
Let's not confuse that week off with vacation.
That's not
separate.
That's not vacation. They have to actually put in for vacation, and we hire enough firefighters that a certain number can be off every shift, and so they have to compete for that. So sometimes they have the hours on the books and they want to take it off, but there's too many people off already, and they can't take it, so they're denied that day off. And so, especially when you're early on in your career, you might miss a few more birthdays and holidays because you're a little lower on the seniority. But as you're on the job longer and you have seniority, then you do have a few of those privileges where you have a little more of the prime time off, but they all get about the same amount of time off. So
viewers might be thinking, with the new fire stations coming online, how do you juggle approximately the same number of firefighter paramedics? I know you're continuing to hire paramedics, but how do you juggle that existing personnel with more fire stations and try to hold to that 56-hour time frame?
Well, the 56 is, it doesn't matter how many firefighters that you have, they're going to work that 56. Anything over is overtime. So when you talk about the amount of firefighters or amount of overtime that maybe firefighters have earned, remember they had to work 40% longer than everyone else before they started earning any overtime. and then go from there. So when we talk about different stations and we're adding stations, we might add firefighters, but they're all still fitting in that 56-hour work week, or we're asking them to work overtime. And the reality is sometimes overtime is cheaper, even though for the individual they might make more money at the end of the year. They had to work a lot of extra hours. I mean, more hours than the average person would need to maybe make the similar amount of money. And so we will offer some overtime to kind of fill those gaps where we need to. But right now we're on pace to hire enough firefighters to fill those gaps, and we should be okay.
Let's circle around and talk about value, Chief. The value of Lincoln Fire and Rescue, and because it's all about taxpayer money,
right?
And it's the outcome. It's what it costs for the amount of work and job and results that come out of LFR. So talk a little bit more about the value.
Well, kind of the theme of, let's say, the 56-hour work week was the reason why we want to talk about 56 versus 40 is because it is cheaper. It is a 40% cheaper operation for the city to provide the same level of service with less firefighters the way we do it. We can't do it much more because there are some rules about how many hours we can work firefighters, and there's a safety issue we need to, and a quality of life that we need to argue too. But on the same token, when we talk about value, now we've talked about save money in terms of how we staff, but also why do staffing levels matter? Because you could argue, well, just hire less firefighters and then we would save money. Well, that's not necessarily true, and it depends on how you look at things. So if we just look at general fund, then that may be true, but the reality is for the average person is you have two pockets, and one is you're paying taxes, and one you're paying insurance, and that's either insurance for your vehicle, life insurance, your home. And so in our case, we just look at homeowners insurance specific to fire protection, so the fire premium for your insurance. So we just do some quick math to kind of look at how that equates to the average person, what's actually coming out of your pocket. Because the example is if we can get a few dollars extra in taxes, but I save you maybe 4 or 5 times that amount in your other pocket, then it might be a good deal. And so that's where we kind of equate that. So we have a graphic that we use to just kind of show an example of what this might look like. And the numbers look a little confusing, but I'll make it very simple. Is, if you have the typical household of 3 people in your household, you're paying about $440 per year for your fire protection, or for your fire protection. And that's just a cost per capita. That's the total cost of operating Lincoln Fire and Rescue divided by the population. Now, the reality is a good portion of that is sales tax, and a very smaller portion is your property tax. So unless you buy a lot of things, you're actually paying considerably less than that. But we're just kind of using the $400 per year as kind of an average. You're probably paying about $300 for the premium for your homeowner's insurance. That's about average. For that value, you're getting about 15 services. That's fire, EMS, hazardous materials, rescue. We've got the USAR team, we've got public education, we've got a lot of things that we provide. So that total cost out of your pocket is about $745, and that's both pockets. You're paying out of both pockets, that's what you're paying. Now, if you go to the bottom line and you paid we just took LFR and erased it off the map, you'd pay $0, but you would pay about $2,200 for your premium, and so the net cost would be about $220. So between the difference of $2,200 per year minus what we charge, you're saving about $1,400 a year. So that's the value. If we weren't here, you'd be paying about $1,400 more per year. Now, some people would say, well, why don't you just use volunteers? Why don't you, just staff a little bit differently? Well, the middle one just kind of shows if we staff kind of one of our rural fire districts which have volunteers. And this is not an indictment on the quality of the firefighter. It's just a matter of they're not available to stay in the station all the time. They're responding from home. That cost per capita, because they're protecting a smaller population, when you divide it out, typically they're paying more per capita for their fire protection, and they're paying more for their fire insurance. And so when you look at that cost of no fire insurance, you're going to pay about $22,200 per year. If you have a rural fire protection, you're paying about $1,700. In Lincoln Fire and Rescue, you're paying about $745. So we just look at that value when we talk about how much you pay for LFR services every year versus kind of what we're saving you on the back end.
The insurance value jumps out at me. Insurance has a lot, we've learned a lot as a stakeholder in that stakeholders task force, just the importance of good firefighting skills and how that ultimately helps a homeowner save a little bit more on their insurance. You get that better rating, and less money comes out of the pocketbook.
The easiest way to describe this is we've had multiple people that are right on the edge of the city annexes. They come into the city, they contact their insurance agent. Their insurance agent just needs proof that they are serviced by LFR. We provide that proof if you need it. In most of those cases, probably 90% of those cases, the value is about $750 a year less that their insurance dropped just as soon as they came into the city. So that's just, again, that's not an indictment on the quality of the firefighters in the rural districts. It's just a matter of availability. We staff 24/7, ready to go on a 56-hour work week versus, someone who's responding from home and just that delayed response to get to their station to get their equipment to start the response.
I have to admit, when I had conversation with Nancy, I have done so many firefighter shows and just conversations in general. This is one subject that never crossed my mind. It's one of those invisible structures within a service that the general population is not aware of.
Right.
And now we know how it saves money, we know the value of it, and we know why it's the number and the structure the way it is.
Later next month, we're meeting with some of the local apartment owners to just kind of look at how insurance rates, that dropping has impacted them. For some of them I've talked to, they're talking about $10,000 a year savings that they've experienced already. So they're as happy as can be. So that's probably another show that we can do. We're trying to hit the majority of the residents, but we do want to make sure we address the apartment complexes, the business owners, commercial, industrial, make sure that we're meeting their needs too and seeing where that's impacting them. And if we're missing something, what can we do to help them with their business model?
So that's the structure of the 56-hour week for Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Now you can go back and rewind and understand a little bit deeper if that's what it takes. But now you have the structure of Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Thanks everybody for joining us on LNK TV.